Good evening and welcome to another episode of Unscripted, an Unchained RPG review. I am Castle Keeper Bluddworth, and as you can see by the graphics, I am going to be talking about Castles and Crusades, and I am going to be going through a series of videos where I take a first look at the Codex series of supplemental materials for Castles and Crusades. So, what is a codex? A codex is basically a supplemental book where it takes where the writers of Castles and Crusades they take the mythologies and folklore of various cultures throughout real world, in many cases, ancient history, and they bring them to life in the game context. All right, so now I am going to focus first on Nordica because I am currently planning a campaign utilizing Castles and Crusades game system and setting it in Skyrim. All right, so setting it in the world of Elder Scrolls and Tamriel and Skyrim in particular. And so Skyrim is a Nordic, is a Nordic region of Tamriel. And so I'm going to begin with this and start going through this and seeing, well, how can I just transport what's in this codex over to my campaign world as I'm creating it, and then cross-referencing between the Skyrim game guide and this as well to see, all right, how much more crossover and blending can I do between the two. So really excited about that, and hoping to get enough pen to paper and kind of basically lay out what the campaign world setting is going to look like in context with the game system, that I can actually launch this campaign sometime in the next couple of weeks. So just be follow along this channel, and you will start to see that in a couple of weeks, the beginning stages of it. Now, if you are not familiar with Castles and Crusades, so let me just switch screens here. I'm going to go to a full screen here. Um, Castles and Crusades is the primary game system that Troll Lord Games produces. It's primarily written by Stephen and Davis Chenault, and they've had many contributors along the way, including Gary Gygax. This was the last game system that Gary Gygax actually worked on, or contributed to, I should say. And his contribution has been described by Gary himself, is that Castles and Crusades, which is actually a namesake of Gary Gygax's first campaign that he ran. That's what he called his campaign, was Castles and Crusades. And so this is, the whole game system is an homage to Gary Gygax and what he had done with Dungeons and Dragons. So Gary Gygax had described this game system as being the natural successor of AD&D First Edition, kind of skipping over a lot of the bloat that was in AD&D Second Edition, and then pulling some gaming concepts and everything from Third Edition at the time. And so it's the true successor of AD&D First Edition, and some of the systems that are in Castles and Crusades have actually made their way into Dungeons and Dragons 5th edition. So, it's not the other way around, as some people might think that, oh, well, this is just a copy of Dungeons and Dragons. Well, 5th edition is actually a copy of some of what is found in here as well. So there's some question as to which one is the copy, and which one is the is the true game system as it was intended or should have been. So, but anyway, if you're not familiar with this system, the primary thing that you need is the player's handbook, and you can actually get the PDF of the seventh printing of the player's handbook, which is not very much different from this one. So there's no rule changes. It's just formatting differences. Um, you can get that PDF for free on Troll Lord Games website, and so that's all that you need to create characters and learn the game system. Now, the second book that you would most likely need, or really they say you do need, is the Monsters and Treasures. So these two are the only two books that you actually need to play Castles and Crusades, and everything else is just icing on the cake. Consider it like quality of gaming, like quality of life, improvements, quality of gaming improvements. You get a lot of little ideas and things from everything else. Or in the case of the codexes, you actually get a lot of lore and mythology to include in the game that you're running. So I'll set these off to the side, and now we're going to start taking a look at this. So I don't have the PDF, so I'm just going to be flipping through. I know you won't be able to read along, but I'm just doing, this is like a first look, just going through each of the Codex books that I do have. I have 6 of them. There is a 7th one that is taking the mythology and folklore of China, I believe. Hopefully they get around to doing one for Japan, and I'm really hoping that they actually do one that's based on Robert E. Howard's Hyborian Age, which is public domain, so they can actually do one that is of the time period of Conan the Barbarian. Now, whether they can actually include Conan the Barbarian in it is a different story, but they can certainly do the time period and pull from Robert E. Howard's stories in order to do that. But let's get back on to the Codex Nordica. So here we have it, and very impressive artwork. These are written by, or at least this particular one is written by Brian N. Young. And I will, flip on through and see. So here we have it. Yes, Brian N. Young. And then the art is by Peter Bradley and Jason Walton. The layout and cartography is by Peter Bradley. And the editor is Alicia Stanley and Tim Burns. Produced by the Chenault brothers. All right, so we're going to go through and, Stephen, I'm fairly certain Stephen is a historian by profession. And so I'm sure that he has had a lot to do with, with at least working on some of these codexes and the references and everything. I am not sure if the actual author of this, Brian Young, is the same, but looking at what they're doing here really gives me that impression as well. So we start with chapter 1, and I'm not going to go through all of these things. We'll show you the artwork as we get through, and with my lighting and everything, it's going to glare. They're very glossy pages, so I wish I had the PDFs to go along and show this as I skim through it. But so the history and the cosmography. All right, the murky beginnings, the history of the peoples of Scandinavia prior to the infamous raid in 793 CE is spotty at best, but can be understood through a corroboration of multiple sources, archaeology, linguistics, and outside the documentation. Nordic Scandinavia was mentioned early in the history by classical explorers and historians under many names, but all roughly similar. Skadi Islands or Scandinavia possesses a unique history all of its own. And go through, all of this here, then you start getting to the mythic history, of the region of Scandinavia, and here is when we start getting, the giants of giants, and we start learning about giants and the sons of Bor and Ymir's fate. We have the creation of mankind, so you get into the creationism myth, the making of the day and the night. Then you have Asgard, the home of the gods. Yggdrasil, the world tree. You have Ofnir and Safnir, and so on and so forth. So they really do spend a lot of time, just going through and explaining the foundations of the mythology. Then we have the nine worlds, and here you can see an awesome thing here. So you have Hell, you have Jotunheim, you have Niflheim, you have Svartalheim, Midgard, Alfheim, Asgard, Vanaheim, and Muspelheim. And if I'm mispronouncing things, I apologize for it. I know the one thing that I've heard, that I've been told is when the word ends with a capital R, that R is pronounced like a like an sh sound to it. But I'm not Scandinavian, so or any of the Norwegian or anything like that. So I don't know precisely how to say some of these names. But flipping through, let's get to the part here that so there are sections here that they actually show the real world, and they're showing what century and where the culture happened to be during the various centuries, and then spreading out from there. And then we have the Viking, so that's the Viking colonies, and then the Viking the Viking roots, where they had traveled during those many centuries. And then we start getting into actual game content here, where we have magical beings and monsters of this particular codex. So what I like about here is that underneath each of the names, like the Alfar, and then it'll say medium fairy. All right, so and the medium or small or minor or whatever is used as a way, not just a size connotation to it, but also kind of like a strength connotation to it as well, or even a commonality or frequency of encounter as well. So the Alfar is like essentially the basic elf found in this mythology. And we can see here they have typically 2d6 of hit die. That's the one thing about this game system, is that certain creatures will have a d6 for their hit die, others will have a d8 or a d10 or even a d12 for their hit die. And so it's not just the number of hit dice, but it's the type of hit die that they actually have to give them their their hit points. And then typically, when you see something like 4d12, even though 4 doesn't sound like it's very high, the fact that it's d12 gives it that extra element of toughness to them. It's usually a mythological creature that they're dealing with. And so they keep on going through. So here we have, when I first saw it, I was like, well, this thing looks awfully like a gnome, and that's exactly what it is, right? So a D a Disma under Gordi, which is the Swedish name for small people under the ground. So you can actually pretty much make that out there, and it's kind of like it's a fairy folk, right? So they're tiny beings. They're a fairy folk. They only have 1d4, and basically it is these are smaller creatures. Here on the other side, we have the bison, which is a small being also, and these are the races of forest gnomes. So you have two, kind of fairy-like creatures that are side by side here, and the one thing I'm never clear on is like, although this looks like a gnome, this could also be this here, and that's the one thing that they Troll Lord Games could actually just put which creature it is in the in the picture itself, and that's the only thing I would raise. Sometimes it's very obvious, but other times it's not, and it's kind of hard to tell. So that's the only thing I would mention as far as something I'd like for them to do. Now, dragons in here are just incredible. I mean, incredibly powerful creatures, and when they're dealing with this, I mean, you can have so in the monsters and treasures they have the red dragon, and that's what they're using as the basis here, but there could be a variety of different types of dragons like you would normally see elsewhere, and their breath weapon is not just like their full hit points or half their hit points of damage or anything like that. It's their breath weapon does a d10 for every hit die that they may have. So they could be a 20 hit die creature, and they're going to do between 20 and 200 points of damage. So just amazing amount of damage that they could dish out. So and they tend to be much more magical than you would see in Dungeons and Dragons in particular. Drugar. All right. These are actually in Skyrim all over the place. So when I first opened up this, I was like, all right, great. I don't have to actually try to figure out what that is. Just pull this from there. The only difference between this one, which is much more of a mythological creature, or folklore creature, is that these here have vampirism, or sometimes they have vampirism. It says the ability works the same as the basic vampire in the Monsters and Treasure, which they don't in Skyrim. So that's one thing that I would have to tweak in order to get it to work. Um, so these are dwarfs, basically your basic dwarf, a Dvergar, and sometimes I know from other game systems where dwarves are sometimes called dark elves, and so there's a slight difference between the folklore and what a dark elf is compared to what people think in D&D terms of what a dark elf is. And going through, so we had Finfolk here. You can see down here at the bottom, and basically it's your mer people, which you really can't see the picture there. I can't. Let's see if I can do that. Okay, and then I definitely want to put this creature in one of my early adventures that I do create for my campaign. This giant battle swine roam the forests of the Nine Worlds, foraging for food and jealously guarding their young. Named for the goddess Freya's own boar, these giant beasts are sacred and symbolize the strength of warriors. So here you have a creature that is an example of a 4d12 in hit points. They are giant sized. They trample for 2d8 and they gore for 2d10. Lots of damage, if you consider that, in comparison to your typical wild boar that you'd see in Dungeons and Dragons. Here they take it to that next level. And if I just do a comparison very quickly, because I'm sure that there was probably a wild boar here. Let's see. I will do this comparison while I'm actually here. So boar, wild, razorback, 43. Let's see how these compare. I'll actually do this comparison. So here is a wild boar, and this is hit die is 2 hit die, D8 they use, and their gore attack is 2d6. It's a medium-sized creature, and I like the fact that they give you the XP here in the thing right on the page itself. So that's always nice. So you can see the dramatic difference between the two. All right. Not just the fact that this one is giant, but it's so much more tougher, and it tramples and gores a tremendous amount of damage. So that's what I really meant by, when you start tapping into these codexes and you start, pulling out these mythological creatures, you're really going to up the ante on the challenge that the player characters are going to be facing. So let me continue on. We have Huldra. Later on, we have trolls. We have Jontons, which are giants, basically, and all descendants of Ymir. Unlike the fire and rime giants, the basic Jotunn can vary appearance and behavior, showing a diverse range. Use Hill Giant in the Monsters and Treasures for a reference. And if I did that comparison between Hill Giants and this, so here it's a large creature. It has 9d8 of hit die, and its damage is d8 for its fist. And if it's wielding a weapon, 3d8 in damage for its weapon. So tremendous amount of damage that these things can dish out. And it's something that you have to consider when you're creating your first campaign. You might want to consider, if you are going to be including these mythological creatures, that you're really going to have to start thinking about your player characters and how they're starting off with, and how you're going to give them the ability to either the ability to withstand a lot of damage. So you might want to do maximum hit points for, maybe even every level, just to, if you're going to have a really mythology based campaign, or you're going to prep your players, mentally for the fact that chances are you're going to lose a lot of characters during this campaign. So be prepared. Maybe you want to roll 2 or 3 of them at a time. That way you have a nice little backlog of characters that you can draw upon in case they do drop. So some of these things are really, really cool looking. You can see the artwork is very, very good. I mean, I love the artwork that is in here. So exceptional artwork. Some of these things are very dark looking. So this is a spirit, a Daildgast. Daildgast, I guess, is a spirit that guards sacred border stones between tribes. And Skyrim has a lot of spirit type creatures that you can encounter. So here we have a troll, 6d8 or 8d8, depending on whether it's a small to large. So trolls can be of varying size in the mythology. And so here you have this. Now, I've seen other Norse mythology RPGs treat trolls as many other things, like skeletal warriors are also called trolls. So they have a different definition in the mythology for what a troll is. But this looks like your typical D&D esque kind of troll, or even Tolkien. Tolkien based his trolls on this kind of a troll. We have Valkyrie. So these are Volver, all right, and Volver are rare wolf-headed humanoids that are mainly found in Mannerheim and Hejotland Islands, the Shetlands. Unlike werewolves, they do not transform or change shape, but remain the way they are from birth. All right, so that's just what you're going to encounter. So, like wolf men. So now we get into wizardry and enchantment, and you have the satyr. The satyr is magic was in the universe. Um, there's two. There's satyr, and then there's a sutra. And satyr is a more traditional magic, and a sutra is more based on like the worship of deities. At least that's how I've always I've come across them. It might be different here. I'm not really digging in, but they have some new character classes, right? So now you have the sorceress is a character class. So they do have in these codexes new character classes, new system of magic using runic magic here, and so we have the runic secrets and the runes of Odin, and then continuing on. So each rune that is being used has a different attribute that might be utilized. So, language of the giants uses intelligence. Uh, wealth of vitality uses charisma, and so on. Writing uses charisma. It would be kind of like weird. Well, what does writing have to do with charisma? And that's because you're calling upon the deity for their favor, and that requires charisma to do. And so that's one thing that they had there. Little difference. Let's see. Then here we have a prophetess. All right, also a charisma based class, and they have different spells that they can call upon, and ring oaths and charms. Now we get to chapter 5 and the gods and the giants. I'm not going to spend too much time in here. I mean, we have the gods that you've most likely heard of, like Thor and Balder, and Tyr is another well-known one. Bragi, Heimdall, Vidar, Forseti, Loki, Frigg. You're going to have Freya, obviously Odin as well. Giants, monsters, and evil beings. And so they're just giving a description here of them. They're not giving stat blocks of them. Pagan religiosity. And they do include some of the Edda in here. It talk about warriors and battlecraft. So the basic warrior, elite warriors, shield maidens. So they spend a whole section on shield maidens here. The accoutrements of war. So just sections on armor, shields, weapons, missiles and ranged, transport and tack. To go, a Viking. Yeah, Viking was an activity. It was not a noun. Berserkers, so another specialty class, and they have everything that everything that you need in order to create that character class. Quite a lot, actually. Um, there, then there's the Castle Keeper info. All right, so here we get Nordic society and sea voyages and just basically ways that you can incorporate all of these all of these pieces of information and lore and such into whatever um, whatever game or campaign that you're running. And let's see. And here we have many of the, some of the Ida here. Looks like a conversation between Thor and Harbard, going all the way through. The name gift. So we have various names for male Norse names under Swedish, Danish, and Norwegian, and female Norse names. Odin's many names, which I never realized there were just so many. I mean, there's almost 2 pages of his names. The Eddas and sources on how to use them in gaming. So that's pretty cool. I mean, that's a really cool section that they take the Edda and then they say this is how you can incorporate them in running your game. So that's what takes a themed a themed campaign and just adds that level of authenticity to it that I think is just phenomenal. So I'm really looking forward to utilizing this and going through. And so finally, we have here um, all of this is presented as a backdrop to the game you are already playing, expanded upon the core of the CNC Material Codex. Nordica brings a host of new wizardry, new lore, and enchantments, gods for the characters, warriors, and battlecraft. Added to all of this are the new materials for the Castle Keeper, all designed to enhance rather than hinder play. So really excited about having gotten these. So I picked up 6 of them as a bundle, and got a huge military discount. So I thanked him a lot for hooking me up with that, and having gone back and forth a little bit with Stephen Chenault over just setting that whole thing up, because I never used that. I hadn't used that discount prior to this time around, and so I was really happy to have done so, because it allowed me to pick up all of these things, along with a T-shirt and some other items as well. So I'm really looking forward to digging in to Castles and Crusades. I've run a short a short campaign of this. Um, had some timing issues with it. I'm really looking to get this Castles and Crusades / Skyrim campaign up and running, and using this book is going to be a major component in actually doing that. So Listen, if you haven't had an opportunity to take a look at Castles and Crusades, I strongly recommend that you do. It is it's a phenomenal system, much more challenging than 5e as far as the player characters like surviving encounters, especially if you're using uh, beasts from mythology and such. But it's a much more challenging system. It's basically an advanced system, if you will. And that was always the big difference between advanced Dungeons and Dragons and just the basic D&D, was that it just took it to another level. Um, this game system is so streamlined. It's so much easier to do combat resolution in it than even AD&D First Edition, and it's just a system that works so well with modern players, really, because it focuses less on the dice rolling and more on actually role playing, and it's you're spending more time and you're being more challenged with actually adventuring. And because of that challenge, you really do have that sense that you are on on really an epic kind of a journey, and you're doing uh, you're doing important things within the game worlds, whatever you happen to be running with when you're using Castles and Crusades, because it is a system that really does bring up everybody's level, to that advanced role playing. In my opinion, it's probably the best version of Dungeons and Dragons that's out there, and the fact that 5e borrowed some aspects from it kind of tells you, what how good the system is, when Mike Merles decided, I'm going to take some of this and bring it into fifth edition. So this is not a copy of D&D. This is a natural evolution of advanced Dungeons and Dragons. And this is the game that like I said, Gary, this was the last game that Gary actually contributed to. And so the people over at Troll Lord Games are going forward. So with all this nonsense that Wizards of the Coast and Hasbro had created, um, going back to earlier portion of last month, um, Troll Lord Games, excuse me, Troll Lord Games is moving to you see, their game system was never borrowed from D&D, so they don't have an issue with their game system itself. Um, they have very little SRD from even from the old SRD. We're not even talking about 5.1. They don't have any of that, or very very little of that. Um, and that's only been retroactively applied to game systems that were earlier, because again, in 2004, so it predates 5e by 10 years. So if anything, 5e was the one that borrowed from here and not the other way around. But they are working towards uh, removing the need for the OGL 1.0a. At least that's what they had said several weeks ago. I know that Troll Lord Games said that, we'll probably sign on to the open role playing creatives license, but they're also going to have their own, and they will most likely just, I'm hoping they just stick with their own OGL, and they have stripped out the SRD from anything that Wizards of the Coast actually has some kind of a claim or control on. And you know despite what the Creative Commons is doing. The Creative Commons now is solely if you're doing something for 5e. And so that really doesn't do anything for Castles and Crusades or True Lord games, I think. So they're better off just moving forward. And this is a great system. If you're a 5e player and you're looking to, check out another um, D&D inspired game system that in many ways is much more streamlined than what you have in 5e, and you're looking for more of a challenge, then this is the game system for you to go to. So as always, thanks for joining. I hope you like this video. If you have any questions or comments about this codex or about the Castles and Crusades um, system, just leave those in there and I'll get back to you and answer your questions. If you haven't subscribed to this channel, please consider subscribing and hit the alert button so that you get alerts when I do new videos. I have just recently come to an end of my Del Rey shorts of Robert E. Howard books from the Del Rey printings. I'm looking to shift to something else for shorts. But if there is anything that you want me to do some short content on, whether it be role playing or even more specifically like Castles and Crusades or any other system that I do have, then feel free to leave a comment in there asking for that, and I will address your question as quickly as I can. So without further ado, let's close this one out. Enjoy the rest of your weekend, or actually this is Friday night, so enjoy your weekend, and I look forward to seeing you on the gaming screen sometime soon. You have a great evening.